to Watch documents a highly successful whole board coaching intervention facilitated by Coach James Cook working with NHS Havering as part of a board development programme delivered by Leading for Health.
Havering itself has the oldest population in London and the fastest growing old population in London. Many people came out here after the war and they've stayed, and as a consequence they've got older here.
I was seconded from NHS Barnet, where I've been Chief Exec there for over 5 years, to NHS Havering. NHS Havering at the time was, I think, probably best described as a bit of a challenged situation.
When I first arrived, the board really lacked leadership and lacked clarity. And so the first thing I did was to create 3 priorities. To concentrate on our relationships with partnerships, to make sure that we were a well-performing board, and to ensure that community services were well-tended, because after all we were providing services to 420,000 people.
It had gone through the world-class commissioning external assurance process about saying whether the PCT was good as commissioning or not, and based on a crude league table in the Health Service Journal, came out bottom in the country.
The National Health Service has a series of, they call them traffic lights, and they'd got a red, which is really bad news. But they'd managed to turn it round, and they'd taken it to an orange, and they were going on to be a green. And then all of a sudden, they had, as it were, the ground taken from under them by a new government coming in and changing the whole game. And suddenly, don't forget, these people on the whole aren't paid. Suddenly all this commitment, all this effort, and morale just went through the floor.
However, as a board, we had to provide leadership for the people who were still delivering services for the people of Havering. So if we felt disenfranchised and slightly nervous about the future, that would resonate throughout the organisation.
They needed somebody to come in and take them by the scruff of the neck and say, come on guys, it may be a different objective now, but you can still do something worthwhile. And it was they that did it, not me. They just needed somebody to pull that together.
We were trialling a series of interventions which we thought would help boards to become more effective. And so we invited boards to put themselves forward for, to trial these interventions for us. And Havering was one of those.
From the presentations that were given by NHS London, it was clear that the one most suited to our needs here in Havering was the intervention which offered board coaching.
Very often a board, a chairman of a board or a chief exec may have a coach, a number of the participants on the board may have a coach, but this was whole board coaching, whereby someone such as James could come in and work with the board as a team in terms of looking at the board behaviours, the board dynamic, etc.
The first phase was some very detailed briefing from the chairman, in this case chairwoman, and I was armed with that before I got to the board meeting. At the board meeting, I would then observe a board meeting in full cry.
There were some people who were a bit cynical about the whole process, and some people a bit cynical about anything to do with NHS London. Is this just performance management?
And I think the overwhelming impression was of people fiddling around at the edges, a sense of people not really engaging in what the major issues were. To some extent, people not participating very much, but it was more quiet than anything else.
It took some time for them to get used to someone asking fairly straight questions about what they wanted out of it.
So I'll be talking to the chair about his or her views and aspirations and needs for the board, one-to-one. I'll then be listening in and observing the board and then talking to the board as a team. I'll be watching how they interrelate. I'll be thinking about how's that person getting on with that person. I'll be watching the body language.
It was helpful very much in enabling there to be challenge to what we're doing to enable us to articulate some fears about the process, to sound off to a certain extent, and I think to enable us to sort of try and think through our own solutions to problems, rather than feeling that everything's going to be done to us.
You can't have too many objectives. You can only really focus on a few. And so you'll focus on a few objectives. Who should be the champion of those? I'll now work one-to-one with those champions. I'll be talking to them about how do they communicate back to the board? How do they do the presentation? How do they make sure they get their arguments over in a way that is successful? I'll then be going back to the board. So it's dancing backwards and forwards all the time.
I think there's a number of things that coaching can bring. Of course, it helps to contain anxiety. It helps to manage the uncertainty. You know, it's someone who's at the top of an organisation needs that outlet. But it also helps that leader to plan forward as well. It's not necessarily a remedial thing. People don't just need a coach in difficult times because, oh gosh, you know, they're about to have a nervous breakdown. It's very often because it's supporting them in being their best.
I think it was Francis who came up with the idea of a legacy. And the moment we'd got that concept, we had a new vision.
What would the people of Havering most expect from the board? What would the board feel most proud of as a legacy to the people as they moved on in their different directions?
Suddenly you had buy-in, and individual members of the board were saying, well, I'll do a bit of that, and that's got me written all over it. And various of the professional team were obviously the right people to do various aspects. And so suddenly you had a momentum going.
I personally think board development and getting some external input into that is essential for any board. Even if you're an incredibly successful board, you're going to get stale. You know, you're going to keep on doing the same things. You're going to need to get that out, external sort of challenge, that external sort of, sometimes friction, to enable you to continue to develop. The NHS is constantly changing, it's constantly evolving, and you have to go with that. And therefore you need some prompts, some external help to do that. And therefore I would really recommend any board, whatever position it is, whether it thinks it's a highly successful board or a very challenged board or just somewhere in the middle, I'd really advise them to take advantage of board development and get external input into that.
This toolkit really can be replicated all over. We have our issues because we're a new board of Havering, Waltham Forest, Redbridge and Barking and Dagenham. 4 primary care trusts merged into one means that we still have to unite people behind common goals. And it's much easier to act as a team and to move services for patients forward when we have the common strategy and a common understanding. So I will be using the toolkit in the very near future.
Boards operate in an ever-changing and increasingly complex environment, with rising public expectations and mounting pressure on public finance. Meeting these challenges can be tough. The PDF guides are designed to support you in selecting the appropriate facilitated intervention that will develop your board. It will advise on preparation by the board, involvement of the chair, selection of the intervention, preparation by the facilitator, and finally, action, learning and evaluation. The PDFs reference many of the different types of intervention available, including whole board coaching, the coaching model used so successfully with NHS Havering. These are yours to make full use of, and we hope you find them useful and stimulating.